First of all, let me thank the university for inviting me and for all of you to receive me so warmly. And I am here, I approach you with a lot of humility, because for someone to come from outside Germany and to pretend to talk about what is happening here is pretty audacious. And so I say that, but my comments, you have to understand, come with a lot of respect and empathy for Germany. Germany as a country has internationally promoted freedom of opinion and expression. It's one of the leading members of what is called the Media Freedom Coalition. It has provided visas for journalists who are under pressure abroad, brought them here, has spoken out against attacks on freedom of expression around the world. Germany also, internally, as you know, is party to a lot of human rights treaties. Its own basic law is very strong on freedom of expression, and it's about one of the very few countries that actually recognizes the right to academic freedom in its constitution. So it has a strong legal framework. The judiciary, during my visit, I had the honor to meet with the president of the Supreme Court and the president of the Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe. I was very impressed with their approach to very, very difficult, complex issues of national law, but also of international law. So Germany has a lot going for it. But having said that, I think there are also very grave challenges that Germany is facing now. So when people ask me, why did you choose Germany? I say, if Germany fails, then there is no hope for anyone else. That's why I've chosen Germany. It's very important that Germany, drawing its lessons from the Second World War, it has a unique history there. It has drawn lessons from that. It has set up the democracy, functioning democracy, it has set up these institutions. But now it is probably facing one of its most gravest challenges to democracy. How will Germany handle that? The rest of the world is watching. That is why it's very important for us to make sure that Germany succeeds, and for us to point out to Germany with a lot of love and affection where it's going wrong. Now, freedom of opinion and expression, as you all know, is a fundamental pillar of democracy. One of the words for freedom of speech in ancient Athens was esegoria. And esegoria could be translated as equal speech. What it basically meant that everyone, all the citizens of Athens, had the right to speak, a democratic right to speak about the city of Athens in public. The public space was an equal space. But also in Athens, there was another word for freedom of expression, and that was paresia. And paresia was the right to say what you wanted in whatever way you wanted to whomever you pleased. It may be offensive, but it was also free speech. Now that tension between free speech and the right to speak equally, that has survived all these centuries into the modern age. And I think in Germany, you see that struggle taking place. You see it in other places as well, where freedom of expression on the one hand is important, and we have the right to say what we want. And of course, what is offensive to me may be legitimate criticism to you. So it's very hard to draw the line and say you cannot say this thing because it offends me. But at the same time, of course, we see the consequences of offensive speech as well. And this difference, I want to point out one very interesting data that I came across in preparing for my trip to Germany. There is a poll, and in that poll, the poll was made of members of political party, and it was about speech restrictions. Are you free to speak? 78% of Green Party and 61% of the Social Democrat Party in Germany, members of those parties, said they felt they had free speech. But only 12% of AfD supporters felt the same way. So what you see that is the polarization of German society. There is no agreement on what is freedom of expression. One group feels it's censorship, the other group is happy with it. But this deep rift, there's a deep rift in understanding of freedom of expression, but that also reflects the polarization of society on democracy. And that's where the threat comes in. Now, I am worried about a number of things here. I am worried, and in my report, which is actually, it is now with the German government, I completed my mission on the 9th of February, 8th of February, I think, 6th of February, and I had a press conference at that time. I produced what is called end of mission report. It's public, so you will see my key findings there. And what this report now does is dig deeper into those findings. I've given an advance copy to the German government so that there are no surprises. They will go through it. They will come back to me with factual errors. They will come back to me with their comments as well. It's up to me now to whether I take those comments or not. If there's a factual error, obviously I will correct it. If it's my position, then obviously I will not. And then we go with the report to the UN Human Rights Council on the 17th of July. The report will be public on the website a few days before that. I will present my report to the 40 members of the council. Germany will be there with their report, and there will be their response to my report, and there will be a discussion there, and that's the way Germany will be held accountable at the council. And then, of course, there are recommendations on which I hope to then have bilateral dialogue with the government to see whether they accept any of them or not. So, when I look at the findings, what are the findings? What are the findings of my visit? And I would say the first finding is about this, how can I put it? A real spike, a surge of all forms of hate speech. Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-migrant, gendered vitriol, I would say, have surged, weaponizing freedom of expression. It surged because people on the other side feel they have a right to say this. And of course, what the effect of that has been quite significant on people. Now, the surge in anti-Semitism, you see it has been there for a while. It's been going up for a while, actually, but it really spiked after October 2023 and has almost, I think, doubled there. And what has also doubled at the same time has been violent anti-Muslim attacks between 2022 and 2024, with nearly half of the Muslims in Germany feeling that they're not accepted as part of German society. Now, during my visit, I met many Jewish people, including groups of Jewish students. I met women activists. I met NGOs and activists on the side of the Palestinian advocacy, a lot of pro-Palestinian advocates and others. All of them said the same thing to me. They did not feel safe. They did not feel as they could express their views. Even academics, professors, did not feel safe to say things. Artists felt that if they spoke out, they would lose the offer to display at a gallery, for example, or to perform in a play. So the chilling effect is across the board. So it's not like one group feels safer than the other group. It's across the board. And then, in addition to that, all this spike that we see, a lot of it is amplified by political rhetoric. As you know, the AfD party platform says Islam does not belong to Germany. So when German Muslims tell me they feel they are being excluded, then you know where it's coming from. There have been attacks on refugee shelters, for example. And what many of the groups that I spoke to, and I'm probably not giving you surprises, these are findings that you have already found for yourself, or you would not be in this room to start with, is that as the AfD rises in politics, as hateful rhetoric spreads, the center parties are actually moving towards it. And so there's a normalization in mainstream about this hateful speech. There's growing use, for example, in mainstream politics now of the term imported anti-Semitism. Now, when Germany talks about imported anti-Semitism, then of course a lot of people who are labeled as those who import anti-Semitism would want to know, well, is this a new phenomena? What has happened to Germany's distinct history? And do you acknowledge that or not? And if you acknowledge it, then how do you deal with the current situation? So there are a lot of questions are coming up now in German society by various people. We see also alongside that a marked rise in anti-feminist, sexist, trans-hostile attitudes also, particularly, the research shows particularly in Eastern Germany, but it varies. There is regional variations, but it is happening. There are also an increase of physical violence targeting politicians. They themselves are under attack. I spoke to municipal authorities in Cologne and Leipzig, and both of them said to me that female candidates sometimes don't want to stand for these elections or withdraw their candidacies because there is so much of vitriol and attack on them. And there is, of course, empirical evidence that a lot of it is coming from the far right and some of it also from the far left. On the other hand, I spoke with AfD party members, supporters. They told me they feel they're being censored, there are double standards, they're being treated badly. So again, you see there's empirical evidence behind my finding about this sort of rift in understanding of what freedom of expression is about, and then how do you survive in a democracy if you don't agree on something as fundamental as that. So that is one finding. The other one, equally troubling, is the way in which advocacy and activism is being conflated with terrorism. So there, of course, you know, the two big examples that I focus on is the pro-Palestinian protests and climate advocacy. And we all know, I will not repeat it, you all know all the protests, demonstrations, etc., slogans, symbols, arrests, detention, excessive use of force that has occurred in connection with the Palestinian protesters. And we, myself, and other special rapporteurs, like the Rapporteur on Freedom of Association and Assembly, who deals with protests, I deal with speech, the Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism, we all wrote to the German government and we said, this is the information we have, what do you have to say? And the government's answer was, we are very committed to human rights standards. Only a few assemblies were banned for security reasons, and usually it was because there were violent people there. And whatever we've done, the law enforcement authorities, they have done in line with the relevant laws. When I was here, I met with state and municipal officials, police, the head of police in Berlin, police in Cologne, the Minister of Justice at the level of the Länder. So did all my due diligence there, talked to everyone, and they gave me facts and figures about how many assemblies were actually banned, and the numbers are actually quite low. But it wasn't the actual formal banning. When I spoke with civil society and I spoke with people who were at the receiving end of this behavior, they said, well, they didn't actually ban the procession, but they brought in so many police, they told us what we could or couldn't do, that effectively we could not protest. And that's actually what's happening now, especially now. Now there's no longer banning, it's the restrictions. And the restrictions are all sorts of restrictions, what language you can use. In one case, when I raised that with the Berlin police, they said to me that they only allow it in German or English because they don't have enough Arab speaking interpreters. So every time someone says something in Arabic, they say, we don't know if that person is saying from the river to the sea or something else, so we don't want anyone saying anything in Arabic. Now the question they're not asking is, what's wrong with saying from the river to the sea? Do the people who say it, or the police who try to enforce it, many of them don't even know what river and what sea they're talking about. And I actually asked the policeman, I said, why do you think, one of the senior policemen, why do you think people shout that slogan? What's so valuable about the slogan? And he said to me, he said, it rhymes so beautifully in English. So even the policeman knows that the reason people are saying it may not have anything to do with supporting Hamas. It may have a lot of other reasons, solidarity with the Palestinians, because it's a popular saying for the Palestinians. It's a way of chanting in a procession, whatever. So anyway, that's what is happening. The courts, I think, feel a little like that too, because they themselves, as you know, have decided one way or the other, sometimes in the same jurisdiction. one court has let someone free, another one has put that person in prison. So it's been a real mess, and I even had this, and of course it almost becomes a parody or a joke at the end. It was one particular case of an activist in Düsseldorf who told me that he had been charged, brought to court, the court released him. And as he was going out, he started saying, oh, I'm going to go out and shout that slogan again, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And the police turned to him and said, if you repeat that slogan, we'll arrest you again. Now the police know that the guy was just released by the court, so the court doesn't believe that this is a harmful slogan, but the police were threatening him with a rearrest. So it's sort of become just a joke, let's say, a very painful joke for many people. And there needs to be clarity on that, because in the rest of Europe, it's fairly legal to say that. So what is happening here? And the government, of course, admits that they do not have Hamas members in Germany, Hamas supporters officially. They do not have them. Yet they're using a law, section 129 of your criminal code, which applies to terrorist organizations, which was brought in to deal with Nazi symbols and so on. So you can see from where to where. And that then takes me on to the way in which, of course, certain concepts are being used in Germany. And these concepts are extremely important concepts. One is the term extremism. And extremism is not defined in German law. Extremism is the term that is used by your internal, what you call internal security organization of your Federal Ministry of Interior, the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz, right? And they use the word extremists, suspected extremists, and they categorize organizations. And if someone in their category falls under the label of suspected extremist, they can go and surveil that organization. So there are all sorts of things they can do, because that, of course, has a kind of a smear of it. You know, others get very worried about the organization. And there's also a parliamentary resolution adopted by your federal parliament that, for example, has adopted a resolution about the BDS, the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Movement, which is considered to be one of these so-called extremist movements. And because of the parliamentary resolution, the Interior Ministry says to me, well, you know, our parliament says we should not be encouraging that organization. It's sort of terrorist. And on the other side, of course, the parliament says, well, but, you know, it's the Ministry of Interior that have found them to be terrorists. So you have this wonderful game being played there, but what is extremism is not defined. The other word, and this is where I come into the very sensitive area, anti-Semitism. A lot of the Palestinian protests are being labeled as anti-Semitic. The slogan, from the river to the sea, it is either support for terrorism or it is seen as an anti-Semitic statement, because it is talking about, purportedly talking about the extinction of Israel and therefore the Jewish people. But there is no definition of anti-Semitism anywhere in Germany. Anti-Semitism is not a crime. And yet it's actually being used as a concept to restrict freedom of expression or freedom of association. And it's having great impact. I won't touch the academic area because I know someone else one of you will be talking about it. But in that area, you can see the chilling effect it is having, where academics, scholars feel that there's a smear campaign, especially those that are working, they feel, legitimately in the area of Palestinian and Israeli policy, for example, Middle East studies and so on. They feel that there's a smear campaign against them because they are being labeled as anti-Semitic, and therefore it's very hard for them to raise research funds, for example. So there's a whole area there of artists who have been excluded. And artists have been excluded not only pro-Palestinian, but also those who want to speak about Israeli issues in favor of Israel. They are also being excluded. Whereas art, academia, these are areas which are sort of free zones, where you should be able to safely explore ideas and thoughts and images. But even there, the same toxic effect is coming in. And you all know, of course, that my colleague, Francesca Albanese, was not allowed to speak at the Freie University in Berlin, and had to, in fact, to go somewhere else because what she was supposed to be saying was considered to be anti-Semitic. Now, she has been appointed by the member states of the UN Human Rights Council, just as I have, including Germany, including Israel, including the United States. And now she is being gagged because she's not saying what they're saying, what they want her to say. Let me now say that, of course, there is a lot of confusion around the area of anti-Semitism. I know there are others waiting to speak, so I won't go into everything that's in my report about it. As far as the government is concerned, they tell me that there is a policy, what they call the Staatsräson, about Israel. And therefore, because of that, there is no room to say certain things about Israel. However, they say that there is no limit on political criticism of Israel, but what they are not, should not happen is you should not attack the existence of Israel. That's what the government says. Now, in effect, of course, it's quite a different issue. In effect, what we see, and let me just look at my own notes here, what is happening in Germany on the side of the government is the criminal law and the security laws are being increasingly used, as I said, for Palestine, but also for the climate activists. And there is a case now in Potsdam court against the Letzte Generation. And if that case, if they lose that case, if these activists lose that case, this organization could be recognized then legitimately by the government under Section 129 as a terrorist organization. So what does it do to the climate activist movement when that happens? Because it's not only about the members of that organization, it's about supporters, it's about those who donate money, those who might speak on their behalf, those who give the media space. All that will be stopped. Coming back now to this issue of unclear concepts. I talked about extremism. The second concept I'm talking about is, of course, anti-Semitism. Now, the ability to criticize any state is foundational, is the most basic thing in the right to freedom of expression. And the German government says, yes, legitimate, and I say legitimate criticism of Israel is not restricted, as long as it does not challenge in any form Israel's existence. Now, what is legitimate criticism? Isn't that where the detail, the devil's always in the detail? And what has actually happened in practice? Statements about genocide in Gaza, war crime committed by Israel, illegality of Israel's occupation of Palestine. My colleague Francesca Albanese, they tried to stop her saying precisely those things. But because she has diplomatic immunity, okay, the Freie University did not give her space, she went somewhere else, she said those things, she left Germany without being arrested. That may not have happened if she wasn't a special rapporteur. And there, indeed, I have cases of people as distinguished as her who have tried to come here and say those things and who have been arrested, detained, charged. A lot of German activists, advocates, pro-Palestinian advocates are facing problems there. So clearly there is a real problem. And what I found very interesting is the German government now talks about Israel-related anti-Semitism, anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. Now, under international law, anti-Semitism is religious and racial hatred of Jews that must be condemned. There is absolutely no exception to that. But it is against Jews, as individuals, as a group, as a nation. But under international law, Israel is a state. By its very nature, it is not a rights holder. The right not to be attacked, the prohibition of incitement of racial hatred is a right that I have as an individual. You have as an individual. A state does not have it. A state is a duty bearer. A state is not a rights holder. So how can you apply issues that are rights related to a state and say criticism of Israel is equivalent to anti-Semitism? So there are really big legal holes there. When vague and malleable concepts like this are used, like anti-Zionist anti-Semitism, Zionism is an ideology. It's a political ideology. It's not a group, right? And if, however, sometimes I've been told that the word Zionist is used as a proxy for Jewish. And so if someone is called Zionist, and there is some accusations about Zionism, they're actually targeting people. In those kinds of situations, you look at the context, because Zionism can sometimes amount to anti-Semitism, depending on the intent of the person, who is saying it, how they're saying it, in what context they're saying it. It could amount to anti-Semitism. And under international law, there are actually clear guidelines. And those of you who are lawyers here or international law experts, you know about the Rabat Plan of Action, which is the guidance provided by the High Commissioner for Human Rights, where speech is very reliant on things like that. Because I could be in the bathroom taking a shower, and I could be ranting away with whatever I want. Or I could be standing in front of 500 people in a very public place and saying those same things. The impact, the harm that happens as a result of what I say is what international law protects, not actually just what I say. Because there is in international law no prohibition of falsity. What is false and what is true is not prohibited, precisely because those kinds of labels are used by the government to stop criticism of the government. So if you don't like what you hear as a government, you say, well, that's false, and I'll put you in prison. So that's why international law says, no, that's not it. You see whether it's going to cause harm. And that's why if I say something false about your reputation, you can sue me. But if I say you're wearing a black and white scarf and not a red and white keffiyeh, so what? Right? But if I say you're wearing a keffiyeh and therefore you are a member of Hamas and that puts you in danger, then international law will come in and say, I cannot say that, right? So the context is important, and that context is missing. And a lot of this goes back to a definition that is called the IRA definition. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance adopted a definition of anti-Semitism with examples. And that has now been adopted by many of the European states, also in the US, a lot of institutions, organizations. This definition was never meant to be used as a legal definition. Even the person who drafted it said so. But it has now become almost law. And in Germany, actually, there is actually a parliamentary resolution again. Not a law, so you can't take it to court. It's a parliamentary resolution. So again, you see these non-legal measures coming in, and through that parliamentary resolution, the political parties are asking local governments, municipalities, and others to apply that definition of anti-Semitism. No? So there is this structure to protect Israel from criticism. Now, and when I have raised these issues, particularly in terms of surveillance and so on, I have been told that there is in Germany something that is linked to your historic past, which is, in English, translates into militant democracy strategy. And it is what is called a strijdbare Demokratie, where the state becomes aggressive in its protection of democracy. And when the state becomes aggressive, then it will use its security laws, it will use its counterterrorism laws, because it believes that the democratic institutions are at risk. And of course, in Germany, you go back to the Weimar Republic and you say, well, if the Weimar Republic had been tougher, maybe we would not have the Nazis coming to power. So now let's not make the mistake, let's not have our institutions captured, so let us preempt the capture of institutions by using these laws. And the danger, of course, of that is, where do you draw the line? Because where do you draw the line? And it gives a huge power into the hands of the state. And you have to have a balance. The balance comes from scrutiny, from very tough scrutiny and accountability for when you're applying it, how you're doing it. But if you are applying it as a government committee in close quarters, because it's about security, therefore it doesn't become public, journalists may not be able to know what's happening, people may not know what's happening. So it's a kind of a self-serving strategy that can undermine democracy, not protect democracy. There's huge risks there. And So in conclusion, where does that take us? I would say that, first of all, I think it's extremely important that Germany addresses this whole issue of anti-Semitism and attacks on minorities, migrants, Muslims, and others. That is a problem that has to be addressed. And the government has done a lot on anti-Semitism. They haven't on Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hate. And yet, when you look at the statistics, both are growing at the same rate. And therefore, of course, you're creating a grievance. You solve one problem, you create another one. And that attitude must go. I think it is also imperative that the criminal and security approach on public protests, on advocacy, on activism is concerning and needs to be addressed. Concepts such as extreme, what is anti-Semitism, etc., need to be clarified. And in particular, the use of these soft, I wouldn't even call them soft law, these fuzzy concepts through parliamentary resolutions, through statements here and there that are coming in and then becoming hard law, having the effect of hard law, I would say, but without possibility for the courts to review them, is also very dangerous. And when it comes to anti-Semitism, vague, malleable concepts like Israel-related anti-Semitism or anti-Zionist anti-Semitism, these create confusion and they actually weaken the protection of the rights holders. The Jewish people, the Jewish groups are not safer because no one now knows what is really anti-Semitism. Where is it coming from? If you avoid hitting the right people and putting them into prison, then the wrong people end up in prison. It doesn't make society safer. And particularly for Jewish people, and I think when it comes particularly for sensitive issues like hate speech, there needs to be universal standards. There needs to be a definition that everyone agrees with, because it is only by using that universal standard do you get universal response to address and kill the problem. And so actually, human rights law is not just legally the right thing, but I think socially and politically, it's the right definition to use, because that will allow you to use the same definition against anti-Muslim hatred, anti-Jewish hatred, anti-trans hatred, whatever. And people then see equality of treatment. And then people realize that this is wrong. This kind of speech is wrong, and we should not use it. We should not allow our political leaders to use it. So that sense of equality comes in. That goes back to Isagoria in Athens. Let me then say finally that there is, and also in my report you will see there are recommendations. I've also asked for an international, not an international, a federal commission of inquiry to be set up by the federal government to look at the truth of what happened with all these pro-Palestinian protests and actions. And this is actually something that your National Human Rights Institute have also asked for, because where there are different stories. You know, I got one story from the civil society people I was talking, I got another story from the government and the police and so on. So what is the truth? Well, I'm not going to become the arbiter of truth here, but it's the government's responsibility to set up a commission and figure out what the truth is. And that will be important because all these things are not really about law. They're about people, they're about power, and they're about people's trust in their government. So you come down to that basic thing, and I find an over-reliance on law, and I say that as a lawyer, and I say it to people who are teaching law, an over-reliance of law where the law can only take you so far. But fear, hatred, intimidation, these go beyond law. Law is very important and you need it, but a lot of it is about building communities, about restoring trust. So a commission that I talked about is something that we would normally say in post-conflict societies, as you know, reconciliation, truth and reconciliation commissions. And I'm not using that term here in Germany because you're not a post-conflict situation, you're not even a post-democratic constitution, you are a democratic society that's having problems that need to be resolved. But maybe the tools from those areas of division, polarization, etc., could be very useful for you here to figure out ways in which a multicultural, multi-dimensional approach for a multicultural society. I think that is really what you have to deal with now. And the past has taught you many lessons, and I think the strength of Germany is that you can confront the truth. You did that in the past. You confronted the truth after the post-World War II, and you dealt and addressed many of those problems. Now they're coming back in new shape, and you have to again confront that truth and look at creative ways, just as you did in the past, creative ways of bringing communities together, resolving that, and holding up your basic law, holding up those human rights principles for which you're fighting. It's not necessarily through militant democracy. There are many other ways in which you can reach that conclusion. So I'm going to stop here. Maybe I've spoken too much.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Irene Khan, for a formidable account of also a very sobering and speaking as a German human rights academic, of course, as a concerning and slightly scary summary of what you have discovered on your mission to Germany. You described in particular, I think, government practices on the part of government and political actors, such as the Ministry of the Interior, the police, the Bundesverfassungsschutz, the Federal Constitutional Protection Office, etc., that are very concerning. And I felt that you gave us some rays of light and hope when you referenced how in some instances the courts, and of course you had interacted with the judiciary, in fact responded to concerning or rights infringing measures by protecting the individuals at the center of these cases. And also, of course, you pointed to the responses that are available to sort of from the experience of a global human rights movement that has come up with instruments and tools such as commissions of inquiry. I want to say that while I do see these hopeful points, I think that your report, your findings, also remind us of the very considerable force of legislation, for instance, in the area of criminal justice, that of course ultimately is what mediates and gives effect to that highly contested principle of militant or defensive democracy, of wehrhafte Demokratie. And so I think that one of the many questions that I would like to put to you are really about some of those criminalizations that reflect this, what in your preliminary report you call a security-oriented response to polarization in society. Going back to the many examples that you gave of protest around the war in Gaza and pro-Palestine advocacy, we I think have to be very concerned, sometimes at least, about what the judiciary has done on the basis of in applying Section 130 of the German Criminal Code, which, amongst other things, criminalizes the denial and downplaying of the Holocaust. Think of that case. I'm sure many of us are aware of the case of that young woman who, in the early days, right after the horrible attacks of 7th of October in 2023, sort of holds a one-woman protest in Berlin, holding up two signs, one drawing attention to the number of persons killed, to quote her, murdered in Gaza, and the other sign just simply saying, have we learned nothing from the Holocaust? And she is convicted by a German criminal court on the basis of Section 130, although thankfully the conviction was later quashed. another example to my mind of where the concept of militant democracy translates not only into government action or political actors' contributions, sometimes harmful contributions to political life, public life, but where indeed legislation seems to be posing problems is the crime, the criminal offense under German criminal law of an insult leveled at figures in political life. You nod on section 188, of course, of the German criminal code. And we have seen cases of, you know, that Green Party politician who, on being sort of was called by a member of the public a pedophile's trollop, I translate, and who was found by a German court to have been affected by what amounts to a criminal insult, a criminal offense, or indeed our Chancellor Friedrich Merz, whom one citizen on X, to whom one citizen on X essentially attributes the subtext, the words, see here, I too am a shameless, racist asshole. So rude speech, but also political speech. Speech leveled at political figures who surely under international human rights law principles need to sort of take a heightened level of scrutiny. So the questions I would have about these existing pieces, these existing provisions of criminal law legislation in Germany is, can they be read in ways that are compatible, that are consistent with international human rights law principles, with Article 19 of the ICCPR, thinking about what you said about the many alternative ways in which democratic societies can respond to extreme speech, such as the examples I gave. How concerned should we even be about robust political speech and robust criticisms leveled at politicians or emotional expression drawing attention to a great global crisis and global crime? Thank you so much.
Great. Well, first of all, on my side, thank you so much for the report, for coming to Germany, and for meeting many actors, both on the government state side, but also from the NGO and academic side, including us when we met at the end of January, and also for the invitation to this evening. I think it's really important to also bring this conversation to universities, and that's actually also the reason why we got involved as ECCHR, because usually those of us who know our work, we do transnational work, international litigation, with partners all over the world and focus less on what is happening in Germany. But here, also in conversations with academic colleagues, especially from the Max Planck Institute in Halle for social anthropology, and also from the Humboldt University in Berlin, the Center for Migration Research, we really felt that there was a need also for legal clarity on some of those concepts you mentioned. And so they approached us and were saying, well, you do international law. There's lots of things we don't understand. And let's get together and look at what is happening on the ground. So the project which we launched officially, or the report which we launched officially early March this year, is called Gray Zones, Red Lines, Defending Academic Freedom. And it's really meant to also give a tool to all of those academics and students who have questions of what can they do, what can they say, what can't they say, what are possible implications. And so this is the background of the project, which was also sparked very much by a situation at the Max Planck Institute in Halle, which some of you might be aware of, I think you are as well, when Hassan Haj was dismissed by the Max Planck Institute, also for his expressions on social media regarding the genocidal violence in Gaza. And so I think this one example of a dismissal of an academic at an institute, but also the many cancellations of events, Francesca Albanese not being allowed to speak at a university, of course also the student protests and the violence also by police in dissolving those protests, were examples where we really see also this overlap between academic freedom and free speech. And so the colleagues with more of an anthropology background did several interviews with affected academics and students to really understand what are those uncertainties which you also described, which come about with this political rhetoric, but also under the cover of all those very vague concepts. And so that's why we have this term gray zones, which are created through those concepts and create so much insecurity for many people at universities. Because then, you know, in the sense of political rhetoric, there seem to be those red lines in society, in politics, and which make it really hard to know what is still okay to be said, what is not okay to be said. And what might be the implications for my work, for teaching, for research, for studying. And we already spoke a little bit, and that's one of our key things. We also noticed that a lot has to do with the securitization of public discourse, the security approach, which is increasing in especially in where this criticism of Israel is the topic. And what we then analyzed especially is the consequences which fall disproportionately on migrant academics and students. So that's not only about the criminal law, but in addition also migration law, naturalization questions, where this is being exacerbated. Because the consequences are even more extreme for international academics, international students, those who might not hold a German citizenship, where a work place, a studying place at a university for students is directly linked to your residence status or to an ongoing naturalization process. So this was then the focus of our research, and then together with some other legal experts, we put together basically a Q&A answering under those different legal regimes of migration law, but also criminal law, media law, what can be said, freedom of association, those questions which came up in those interviews with affected academics and students. And really we see this as one small element, a first step to know and understand what the rights are, what possible limits also are. And as you said, we have a strong constitutional protection of academic freedom and free speech, but often in practice, it does not materialize. And courts also sometimes play very difficult roles. So yes, there is hope in hopefully also the apex courts, but it's a long process, I think, when we need to go there. Maybe to end and hopefully also to enter into a conversation with all of us on the panel, but also all of you here in the room, what are things which maybe all of us can do at universities? So first, you know, we wanted to also give those affected some tools at hand to understand what is happening, what are their rights, but then also to ask the question, what can all of us do? And what are demands towards university management and leadership, for example, to protect those spaces which are so crucial for debate. And I think that's also the one of the impacts of targeting international academics, that then also the debate and spaces to develop those concepts, to understand what is really happening on the ground, are becoming less diverse. Right? So it also has, besides having a strong impact on the individuals, it also has an impact on the spaces we hold, and where especially universities should be a space to have those debates and conversations. So to also really have this call towards universities who should have institutional autonomy, but then should also speak up against political pressure to securitize campuses and uphold academic freedom strongly also from management, but also to support those people within universities who try to find those spaces and find different ways of dealing with the definite need also to address anti-Semitism, address hate speech, it has anti-Muslim hate speech and actions, but to do so in a different way. So I would be curious also to what everyone here in the room thinks what we can do next.